Welcome to the Apostles' Path, where we walk together through the journey of those who changed the course of history. And the story we tell today is John, the son of thunder who became the voice of love. He was more than 90 years old. By then, nearly everyone he had ever loved was gone. Peter was gone. James, his own brother, was gone. Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Matthew, one by one, the voices that had once walked beside him beside the Sea of Galilee had fallen silent. And yet, every week, they still carried him into the gathering of the church. He was too old to stand, too weak to preach as he once had. His body had grown fragile with the weight of years, but his eyes were still clear, calm, steady, and bright, like the surface of the sea after a storm has passed. The young believers gathered close, waiting for the last living eyewitness of Jesus Christ to speak. They expected a sermon, perhaps a memory, perhaps some hidden detail from the days when the Lord had walked among them. Early church tradition tells us that in his final days, John's message became incredibly simple. Whenever he spoke, he said only 4 words: love one another. Week after week, the same 4 words. No long explanation, no dramatic warning, no attempt to impress the crowd with everything he had seen. Just this: love one another. At last, someone asked him, "Master, why do you always say the same thing?" And the old apostle answered, "Because it is the Lord's command. And if this alone is kept, it is enough." This was John, son of Zebedee, brother of James, the disciple whom Jesus loved. He had stood near the cross when others had fled. He had run to the empty tomb and believed. He had seen visions on the island of Patmos. He was the youngest of the 12, the last survivor, and the only one who did not die by martyrdom. And perhaps that was his hardest calling of all, not to die first, but to remain, to remember, and to keep telling the church what mattered most. This is the story of John, the beloved disciple who outlasted everyone, and the voice of love that still speaks across the centuries. Before we speak of the man John became, we must first understand the young man he once was. And that young man was not yet the gentle apostle of love that many imagine when they hear his name. John began beside the waters of Galilee, not in a monastery, not in a scholar's chamber, and not in a quiet life of reflection, but in the hard, practical world of fishermen, nets, boats, storms, and family labor. His father was Zebedee. His brother was James. Together, they worked the lake that fed the villages of Galilee and shaped the lives of the men who lived along its shore. The Gospel of Mark tells us that Zebedee had hired servants with him in the boat, a small detail that suggests this family was not destitute. They were likely part of a working household with some means, some stability, and some standing within their community. John was not a man wandering without roots. He had a father, a brother, a business, and a future that would have made sense to everyone around him. And then Jesus passed by. Matthew tells the moment with striking simplicity. Jesus saw 2 brothers, James and John, in the boat with Zebedee their father, preparing their nets. He called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. There is no long speech recorded. No careful negotiation. No request for time to settle family business. Just a call, and then a leaving. Imagine Zebedee sitting there in the boat, watching his sons step away from the life he had taught them to build. Imagine the sound of the water against the wood, the half-mended nets still in their hands, the silence after they were gone. John's life changed in a moment. But he did not enter discipleship as a finished saint. He entered as a young man with fire in his spirit. Jesus gave James and John a name, Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. That name matters. It tells us that beneath John's closeness to Jesus, beneath the later language of love, there was once a forceful, intense, impatient heart. John was not naturally mild. He was not naturally tender in every situation. He was zealous, quick, and capable of severe judgment. Luke gives us one unforgettable glimpse of this. As Jesus and his disciples were traveling toward Jerusalem, they entered a Samaritan village, but the people there did not welcome him. To most of us, that might seem disappointing. To John and James, it felt intolerable. They turned to Jesus and asked, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?" The man who would one day write, "God is love," once wanted judgment to fall from the sky upon a village that refused hospitality. That is the distance John traveled. That is the miracle of his formation. He did not begin as the apostle of love. He became the apostle of love because he stayed close to Jesus long enough to be changed. This is one of the most important truths in John's story. Jesus did not choose John because John was already gentle. He chose him knowing the thunder was there. He chose him knowing the ambition, the intensity, the impatience, and the sharp edges of his soul. And Jesus did not erase John's fire. He purified it. He redirected it. The same passion that once wanted to call down fire upon enemies would one day burn with holy love for the church. The same young man who wanted judgment would later plead with believers to love one another. The same disciple who misunderstood the heart of Jesus in Samaria would eventually understand that the heart of God is love. This should give hope to anyone who has ever wondered whether their temperament disqualifies them from grace. Some people come to Christ quiet and cautious. Others come with thunder in their blood. John reminds us that Jesus is not afraid of strong personalities. He is not intimidated by intensity. He does not reject a person because their heart has not yet learned tenderness. He calls them, walks with them, corrects them, and slowly teaches them what love truly means. And perhaps John remembered that Samaritan village for the rest of his life. Perhaps, as an old man in Ephesus, when he said again and again, "Love one another," he was not speaking as someone who had never felt anger. He was speaking as someone who knew what it meant to be transformed. He had once wanted fire to fall on those who rejected Jesus. In old age, he wanted mercy to reach them. He had once been a son of thunder. But after a lifetime with Christ, thunder had become testimony, and zeal had become love. There are 3 moments in the life of John where we must slow down and look carefully, because in those moments we begin to see who he truly was becoming. Not merely one of the 12. Not merely the brother of James. Not merely a young man with thunder in his blood. We begin to see the disciple who would remain when others could not. The witness who would carry memories no one else could carry. And the man whom Jesus would trust in one of the most tender moments of his earthly life. The first moment takes place in the upper room, on the night before the cross. Jesus is at the table with his disciples. The bread has been broken. The cup has been shared. The room is heavy with words they do not yet understand. And there, close to Jesus, is the disciple described in John's Gospel with a phrase that has echoed through Christian history. The disciple whom Jesus loved. John does not place his own name at the center of the story. He does not say, "I was the closest." He does not say, "I was the most faithful." He simply remembers himself as loved. That is the identity he carries into old age. After decades of ministry, after exile, after loss, after watching the first generation of believers pass away, John looks back and says, in effect, the most important thing about me is not what I accomplished. The most important thing is that Jesus loved me. That alone is a sermon. Many people spend their whole lives trying to be remembered for strength, achievement, influence, or sacrifice. John had seen more than almost anyone in Christian history, yet he did not build his identity on what he had seen. He built it on the love he had received. And perhaps that is why, in his final years, his message became so simple. A man who knows he is loved can finally teach others how to love. The second moment comes later that same night, in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John deeper into the garden than the rest. These three had seen the glory of the Transfiguration, and now they are brought close to the sorrow of Gethsemane. There is a kind of intimacy in suffering that not everyone is invited to witness. Jesus does not hide his anguish from them. He tells them his soul is overwhelmed. He asks them to stay awake and watch with him. And then, when he returns, he finds them sleeping. John was there. The beloved disciple slept while the Lord prayed in agony. We should not pass over that too quickly, nor should we treat it with contempt. It is a deeply human failure. The body becomes heavy. Fear exhausts the soul. The mind cannot bear the weight of what is coming. These were not heartless men. They were weak men, and that is different. John, who would one day stand near the cross, first failed to stay awake in the garden. Perhaps he remembered that failure for the rest of his life. Perhaps, when he later wrote about love, he wrote as a man who knew that love is not proven by flawless strength, but by returning, remaining, and being restored by grace. And then comes the third moment, the moment that shaped the rest of John's life. When Jesus was arrested, the disciples scattered. The courage that had sounded so confident at the table dissolved in the darkness of the garden. Peter followed at a distance and denied him 3 times. Others disappeared from the story. But when the gospel brings us to the cross, John is there. Standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, Mary Magdalene, and the disciple whom Jesus loved. John remained. We are not told how he found the courage to stand there. We are not told whether he was trembling. We are not told whether he spoke a single word. Perhaps there are moments when love does not know what to say, and its only act of faithfulness is presence. John could not stop what was happening. He could not explain it. He could not rescue Jesus from the cross, but he could remain near him. And sometimes, in the hardest hours of life, that is what love does. It stays. It stands close enough to share the sorrow, even when it has no power to remove it. From the cross, Jesus looks down and sees his mother. He sees John standing beside her. And in that moment, with his own suffering before him, Jesus thinks of her. He says to his mother, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour, John took her into his own home. Consider the weight of that trust. Jesus entrusts Mary, his mother, to John, not to the loudest disciple, not to the strongest, not to the one who had promised most confidently that he would never fall away. He entrusts her to the one who stayed. This is not a small detail. It means that John's presence at the cross became a calling. His faithfulness in one terrible hour became the doorway into a lifelong responsibility. He would carry not only the memory of Jesus, but also the care of the woman who had carried Jesus into the world. For older believers, this part of John's story speaks with unusual tenderness. Many know what it means to stay when others leave, to care when life has become painful, to stand beside someone when there is nothing left to fix. A hospital room, a graveside, a quiet house after the phone calls have ended. Love is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is simply refusing to abandon the place where God has asked you to stand. John's greatness was not only that he wrote a gospel, or that he received revelation, or that he lived longer than the others. Before all of that, he was the disciple who stayed near the cross. And Jesus saw him there. He always sees the ones who stay. On the third day after the crucifixion, while the morning was still young and the city was only beginning to wake, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and found something no grieving heart expected to see. The stone had been moved. The entrance was open. The body of Jesus was gone. She did not yet understand what had happened. She did not yet have the language of resurrection. She only knew that the tomb was empty, and so she ran. She ran back to Simon Peter and to the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and she told them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have put him." At those words, Peter and John began to run. Two men, carrying 3 days of sorrow, fear, confusion, and perhaps the smallest spark of impossible hope, ran through the early light toward the garden tomb. John records a detail so human that it almost feels like an eyewitness smiling through the memory. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. John arrived first, but when he came to the entrance, he did not go in. He bent down and looked inside. He saw the strips of linen lying there, but he waited. Then Peter arrived behind him, and in the way we might expect from Peter, he went straight into the tomb. Peter entered first. John followed. And then John tells us one of the simplest and most powerful sentences in his gospel. He saw and believed. He saw the linen cloths. He saw the place where the body had been. He saw not disorder, not evidence of panic, not the scene of a theft, but something quiet, ordered, and holy. And in that moment, before he had seen the risen Christ face to face, before he had touched him, before he had heard his voice in the upper room, John believed. That is important. John's faith did not begin with a full explanation. It began with a sign. It began with an empty place. It began with a silence that was no longer the silence of death, but the silence of God having acted. There are moments in the life of faith when we are not given every answer at once. We are given enough light to take the next step. John looked into the tomb and understood what his heart was only beginning to receive. Death had not had the final word. The cross had not been the end. The one he had watched die was alive, and the world would never be the same again. Years later, when John wrote his gospel, he did not write like a man passing along rumors. He wrote like a witness. He had stood near the cross. He had entered the empty tomb. He had eaten with the risen Lord beside the sea. And after decades of prayer, memory, teaching, and reflection, he shaped his gospel in a way unlike Matthew, Mark, or Luke. The other gospels begin in familiar places: a genealogy, a birth story, a prophet in the wilderness, the beginning of Jesus' public ministry. John begins before all beginnings. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John does not merely introduce Jesus as a teacher, healer, rabbi, or Messiah. He pulls back the curtain of eternity and tells us who Jesus is before Bethlehem, before Galilee, before the Jordan, before creation itself. The one who touched lepers, washed feet, wept at a tomb, and cooked breakfast on a shore was the eternal Word made flesh. This is why John's gospel feels different. He is not simply arranging memories. He is interpreting a lifetime of wonder. He is showing us the meaning beneath the events. He alone gives us the wedding at Cana, where water becomes wine and glory is quietly revealed. He alone gives us Nicodemus coming by night, hearing that a person must be born again. He alone gives us the Samaritan woman at the well, where living water is offered to someone the world had overlooked. He alone gives us the raising of Lazarus in such intimate detail, with Jesus standing before a tomb and declaring, "I am the resurrection and the life." And John gives us the long farewell discourse, those final words in the upper room, where Jesus speaks of the Father's house, the coming of the Spirit, the vine and the branches, and the love that must mark his disciples. These are not random additions. They are the memories of a man who had lived long enough to understand what they meant. When John was young, he heard Jesus speak and followed. When he was old, he wrote so that others might believe. Near the end of his gospel, John tells us his purpose clearly. These things are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. That is the heart of John's witness. He is not writing to impress scholars, though his gospel has nourished the greatest Christian minds for centuries. He is not writing to preserve his own reputation, because he hardly names himself. He is writing so that faith might be born in those who did not stand where he stood, who did not run where he ran, who did not see what he saw. John became the bridge between eyewitness and believer, between the empty tomb and every generation that would hear the story afterward. And perhaps that is why the race to the tomb matters so deeply. The young John ran ahead with the strength of his body. The old John wrote behind with the strength of his memory. In both cases, he was moving toward the same truth. Jesus Christ is alive, and life is found in his name. By the time John was taken to Patmos, he was no longer the young fisherman who had left his father's boat on the Sea of Galilee. He was an old man now, carrying the memories of a vanished generation. He had seen Jesus with his own eyes. He had leaned near him at the table. He had stood beside Mary at the cross. He had entered the empty tomb. He had watched the church grow from a frightened room in Jerusalem into a living movement spread across cities, ports, households, and provinces of the Roman world. But he had also watched suffering follow that movement wherever it went. Empires do not easily tolerate another kingdom, and Rome, with all its power, demanded loyalty that no Christian could give completely. Tradition places John's exile during the reign of Emperor Domitian, when pressure against the churches intensified and the confession, "Jesus is Lord," stood in quiet defiance of every imperial claim. John himself tells us where he was and why he was there. "I, John, your brother and partner in the tribulation and the kingdom and the patient endurance that are in Jesus, was on the island called Patmos on account of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus." Notice how he introduces himself, not first as an apostle, not as the last eyewitness, not as the elder whose authority no one could question. He says, "Your brother and partner." In suffering, John does not stand above the church. He stands with it. Patmos was a small, rocky island in the Aegean Sea, isolated and wind-worn, a place where the Roman authorities could send a troublesome old man and hope the world would forget him. But heaven had not forgotten him. On the Lord's day, John says he was in the Spirit, and behind him he heard a loud voice like a trumpet. The exile turned. The forgotten prisoner became a witness again. And the first thing he saw was not a beast, not a battle, not a symbol of judgment, but Jesus Christ, risen and glorified, standing among the lampstands. The message of Revelation begins there. Before the visions, before the seals and trumpets, before the mystery and the imagery, John sees Christ among his churches. He is not absent from their suffering. He is not distant from their fear. He walks among the lampstands. He knows their works, their endurance, their compromise, their weariness, and their love. This is why Revelation must not be reduced to a puzzle, a timeline, or a secret code for predicting the future. It is a pastoral letter of hope written in the language of apocalyptic vision. It was given to real churches facing real pressure: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. They needed more than information about the end of history. They needed courage to endure the present. And John, the old disciple of love, was given a vision large enough to lift their eyes above the empire. Rome looked permanent. Its armies looked unstoppable. Its economy, temples, statues, roads, and governors seemed to define the world itself. But Revelation pulls back the veil and says, "Do not mistake what is visible for what is ultimate." Thrones on earth rise and fall. The Lamb reigns. The powers of the age make loud claims, but heaven sings a deeper song. The faithful may suffer for a time, but their tears are counted, their witness is seen, and their hope is not in vain. When John falls at the feet of the glorified Christ as though dead, the Lord places his right hand on him and says, "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last." Those words are the heartbeat of the whole book. Do not be afraid. Not because the world is gentle. It is not. Not because the church will be spared every sorrow. It will not. Not because believers will always understand what God is doing. Often, they will not. Do not be afraid because Christ is the first and the last. He was there before every empire, and he will remain after every empire has become dust. For an older believer, those words carry a particular tenderness. By the later years of life, a person has seen enough change to know how fragile the world can be. Families change. Nations change. Churches change. Bodies weaken. Friends pass away. The future can feel less like a promise and more like an approaching uncertainty. John knew that feeling. He was old, isolated, and exiled. Yet in the place where he seemed most alone, he received one of the greatest visions of divine nearness ever given to the church. Patmos reminds us that isolation is not abandonment. A lonely island can become holy ground. A season of limitation can become a place of revelation. A voice silenced by human authority can still be used by God to speak across centuries. John did not write Revelation to make frightened people more frightened. He wrote to give them courage. He wrote to tell them that Jesus sees. Jesus speaks. Jesus reigns. And Jesus will make all things new. That is the hope at the center of the vision. Not escape from history, but the renewal of all things by the one who sits on the throne. Near the end of the book, John sees a holy city, a new heaven and a new earth. And here's the promise that God will dwell with his people. Every tear will be wiped away. Death will not have the final word. Mourning will not have the final word. Pain will not have the final word. The Lamb who was slain will be the light of the city. And perhaps, as John wrote those words, he remembered all the faces he had lost. James, Peter, Mary, the brothers who had walked with him, the believers who had suffered under the weight of the empire. Revelation was not abstract to him. It was personal. It was the promise that none of them had been forgotten. The old man on Patmos was not given a vision merely of the end. He was given a vision of Christ at the center of everything. And from that lonely island, John still tells the church, "Do not be afraid. The Lamb reigns." After the death of Emperor Domitian, tradition tells us that John was released from exile and allowed to return to Ephesus. He came back not as a young missionary eager to begin his work, but as an old shepherd returning to the churches he loved. Ephesus was one of the great cities of the Roman world, filled with marble streets, crowded markets, temples, teachers, merchants, and travelers from across the empire. But for John, it was also a place of ministry, memory, and spiritual responsibility. Here, the last living apostle continued to guide believers who had never seen Jesus in the flesh. They knew the Lord through the testimony of men like John. They believed because someone who had seen had faithfully spoken. And now, near the end of his life, John's message grew simpler, not because his theology had become shallow, but because wisdom often becomes clearer with age. The young son of thunder had become an old father of the church. The man who once wanted fire to fall from heaven now wrote, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God." He had lived long enough to know that this was not sentiment. It was the center. Love was not a soft addition to Christian truth. Love was the evidence that a person had truly known God. According to an ancient tradition preserved in the church, when John had become too weak to walk, the believers would carry him into the assembly. The congregation would grow quiet. They were listening to the last man alive who had leaned near Jesus at the supper, stood near Mary at the cross, and entered the empty tomb. Perhaps they expected memories no one else could give them. Perhaps they hoped he would describe the Lord's face, his voice, his manner of walking, his prayers in the night, or the look in his eyes after the resurrection. But John would say only this: "Little children, love one another." Again and again, the same words. Finally, someone asked him why he always repeated the same command. And John answered, "Because it is the Lord's commandment, and if it alone is kept, it is enough." Whether every detail of that tradition can be verified or not, it carries the unmistakable sound of John's writings. It is the voice of the apostle who wrote, "God is love." It is the voice of the elder who addressed believers as his little children. It is the voice of a man whose long life had stripped away everything secondary and left only what could not be lost. Around the year A.D. 100, John died in Ephesus. Not by the sword, not by the cross, not by the spear. He died as an old man, after a lifetime of witness. He was the only one of the 12 traditionally remembered as dying a natural death. But we must not mistake that for an easy life. John had suffered in a different way. He had watched his brother James become the first apostle to die. He had lived to hear of Peter's death. He had seen the church persecuted, Jerusalem destroyed, and beloved companions disappear one by one from the world. Longevity can be a gift, but it can also become a burden of memory. To live longest is to grieve often. To remain is to carry names, faces, voices, and empty places at the table. John knew what it meant to outlive nearly everyone, and yet he did not become bitter. He did not retreat into silence. He kept writing. He kept teaching. He kept reminding the church of the one truth that had remade his own soul. God is love, and those who belong to God must love one another. That is why John's peaceful death is not a quiet footnote. It is a theological statement. The apostle of love was kept until the end, not because he was spared sorrow, but because the church still needed his witness. It needed someone who could say, from the authority of a whole lifetime, that love is stronger than fear, stronger than exile, stronger than grief, and stronger even than death. John began as a son of thunder. He ended as the last witness of love. And in that transformation, we see the patient work of Jesus Christ in a human life. And now, as we come to the end of John's story, Perhaps we should not picture him first on Patmos, or at Ephesus, or even writing the opening words of his gospel. Perhaps we should picture him standing near the cross, young enough to be afraid, but faithful enough to stay. He did not understand everything in that moment. He could not see the centuries of Christian faith that would come after him. He could not know that one day believers across the world would read his words and call him the apostle of love. All he knew was that Jesus was there, Mary was there, and love required him not to leave. That is where John's witness began to take its final shape. Not in achievement, but in presence. Not in recognition, but in faithfulness. And if you are watching today as someone who has remained through many seasons of life, John's story may speak to you in a way few stories can. Perhaps you have outlived people you once thought you could never live without. A husband, a wife, a brother, a sister, a lifelong friend. Perhaps there are names you still expect to hear, voices you still miss, and empty chairs that no passage of time has fully explained. John knew that loneliness. He watched his brother James die. He lived long enough to see Peter gone, and Andrew gone, and the first circle of witnesses disappear from the earth. Yet John did not conclude that his remaining years were meaningless. He wrote, he taught, he prayed, he comforted the church. He reminded frightened believers that Christ still reigns. And when his strength was nearly gone, he gave the church the simplest sermon of all: love one another. Those final years were not wasted years. They were witness years. And perhaps that is the quiet invitation in John's life for us today. If God has allowed you to remain, then your story is not finished. There may still be someone who needs your prayer. Someone who needs your patience. Someone who needs your memory of God's faithfulness. Someone younger who needs to hear, not from a book only, but from your life, that Jesus can be trusted. The later years of life are not merely a waiting room. In the hands of God, they can become a sanctuary of wisdom, tenderness, and holy purpose. John's life tells us that love is not the weakness of old age. Love is the strength that remains when everything else has been stripped away. The Son of Thunder became the apostle of love, and his last message still stands before the church like a candle that has never gone out. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. So today, remember John. Remember the young fisherman who left the boat. Remember the disciple who stayed at the cross. Remember the old exile who heard the voice of Christ say, "Do not be afraid." Remember the last witness carried into the church, whispering what mattered most. Love one another. That was enough for John. And if we truly receive it, it may be enough for us as well. Thank you for walking with us today on the Apostles' Path. Next time, we will meet Philip, the apostle who asked the question many are afraid to ask, and received one of the most profound answers Jesus ever gave. If this episode has spoken to your heart, share it with someone you love, someone who may need to be reminded that their remaining years still matter deeply to God. And until we meet again, may the grace of Christ steady you. May the love of God surround you. And may the Spirit teach us all to love one another. Thank you for walking with us today on the Apostles' Path. If John's story has spoken to your heart, take a moment to share this episode with someone who may need to hear it. Someone who has remained faithful through loss, loneliness, or the long seasons of life. And if you would like to continue this journey through the lives of the 12 apostles, please subscribe to the Apostles' Path, leave a like, and turn on the notification bell so you will not miss the next episode. In the comments below, tell us this. What part of John's life touched you most? The cross, the empty tomb, Patmos, or his final words, "Love one another"? Your reflection may encourage another believer who is watching today. Until we meet again, may the love of Christ remain with you, strengthen you, and teach us all to love one another.